one of the things I want to start off with, I want to kind of have everybody, again, kind of tell what their company does. And the biggest thing that I'm asking also is, what's kind of like the second order effect that'll happen if you get mass adoption of what your company is doing? And a key thing here is I'm a bio guy, so I got through AP Physics in high school. And so the math kind of stopped. So to put it in a case that someone like me can actually understand. So you want to start us off?
Well, since you just heard from me, this is the easy part. Right? So we're building the quantum internet. The impact it's going to have on the world is that it's going to basically protect all of your transactions going forward. I mean, think about everything that we do right now that could be vulnerable to hacking and security problems. If quantum communication actually works, this protection, right, starts to protect all of the things which we've come to take for granted. And we no longer have to think about hacking.
So my name is Worley. We have a company called Strangeworks based here in Austin, and we're basically eliminating all of the barriers to getting companies to use this. So the pricing barrier, the need for a physicist or a scientist or even developers, and basically just focus on reducing that and getting as many people using the technology as possible.
Yeah, Manuel. So we shrink particle accelerators, and if we successfully do that, right, I mean, just think back. The first computers were the size of a building, and now we all carry them around in our pocket, and we use them for things that nobody imagined at the time. And the same is true for what we do. If we can successfully shrink particle accelerators and even make them the size of a normal machine, and now any company, any small university, any country that currently can't even afford a particle accelerator, because that's how expensive they are, can use them, then they get used in pretty much every endeavor of research, from bio to chemistry to material science, energy, solar, computation, everything. Medical, drugs. Yeah, I mean, and that's really what we want. We want to democratize access and push them out there so everybody can have them.
So I'm Wasik Bukhari with Pasqal. We are solving problems using quantum computation that cannot be solved through traditional computation or generative AI. The secondary effect of that, obviously, well, the primary effect of that is it's analogous to what happened to the world once computation was invented. It changed the world. When we have a new paradigm of computation, like quantum computation, then it will change the world yet again. The secondary effect to that is, hopefully, number one, it makes us a dominant company, one of the leading tech companies in the world. But second is that hopefully we can solve many problems that are considered unsolvable all across various domains, and that will make lives better for everyone.
So I kind of joked with the fact that it's hard for someone to understand, and communication in whether it be quantum and physics tech and deep tech is actually a real issue. And especially since a lot of times you're the likely expert sitting across the table, whether it's a room full of laymen, whether it's other people in the field or investors. And I can tell you, as an investor, getting a technical presentation is the worst possible thing, right? I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Why is this actually important? So how do you really think about and approach communication in such a deep and technical field?
Actually, Strangeworks is really interesting for this. So we have an expert, but at the same time, so one of the things we did early on, and this was funny because when we first pitched Quantonation, obviously we were pitching a group that actually had quantum expertise, because at the time Christoph was doing a lot of the diligence on the front end. What we found very helpful actually was using educational animation. One of the things which I think everybody has really started to rely on visual learning so much more in the last 10 years. And I think it's a really powerful tool for being able to demystify some of the concepts and also drive home some of the salient points about your technologies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I like to think of it this way. If you're in quantum, right, which we all are, and your service, your machine, whatever, requires a physicist to be at the company, or somebody really great at computer science, if you took all of the people related to research in the entire planet and you projected out a few years and said we'll be 8 billion people, still less than 0.1% would be capable of doing that job. So you have almost no addressable market today, which is kind of where we come in, which is you have to have the whole fact that you're communicating it is the problem. You think it's hard to get that technical pitch as an investor? Try it as a customer. The number one thing all of our customers say is, thank God. Just like we have a problem we want to solve, could you talk about the problem? Nobody cares if it's look, enterprise buys because it's better, faster, cheaper. That's it. If you go into CIO and you're pitching them with linear algebra and you tell them about the quantum mechanics, you've lost them in the first few seconds. And they also, the person writing those big checks you want, they always want to be the smartest person in the room. So you never want to do that, right? You don't want to big dog them on that. And so, what we've tried to do is think about it in the evolution of technology. So if you look out not even 50 years, not even 30 years, probably 10 to 20, and it could be a lot faster, there won't be applications. The network layers will not work the same. I mean, go back to 1959, Jack Kilby invents the integrated circuit. Before that, you bought transistors one at a time. Early 60s, Iris and everybody introduced APL, a programming language, because the way to program a computer is to talk math, because that's what they do. Since then, all we've done is added more and more room for failure, more and more layers of abstraction, and we're not getting it to where, these things can be mass adopted. I mean, you mentioned democratizing stuff. I mean, it's kind of what we claim. When we first came out, we said humanizing quantum, right? But you have to be able to go in and not talk about your technology. You don't want to sell the features. You want to sell the benefit. Here's the technology I have. Here is what your problem is. Here's how my technology solves your problem. How does it work? Don't worry about it. Like, literally, they would appreciate that.
All very good points, very good points. And let me add to that. I mean, what I tell my students, so I still teach, and Jason, I'm teaching physics for med students this semester, if you want to come. If a pre-med can understand it, I'm sure you can.
I stuff. It's all literally Greek to me.
Tuesdays, Thursdays, 8 to 10. No, ask questions. I mean, and this is, of course, always hard to get people to ask questions, but ultimately that's the key. Only you know what you don't understand or what you would like to understand better. Ask questions. And, of course, pitches are sometimes rushed. We try, an active thing. I try to schedule meetings that are a little longer because it just makes things, if you have time, if you're not rushed, if you feel you can actually ask questions, and there are plenty of questions around this. The stuff is complicated. And then repeat. Do multiple meetings. Do it again and do it again. I mean, somebody said, and of course there's people out there on the internet who will tell you that you can become a concert pianist in a day. Well, you can't. It doesn't work that way, and this is for everything that's reasonably complex. You just gotta keep at it. I mean, keep it simple, of course, without, you break it down, you try to use analogies a lot. We try to do that. But you don't want to be wrong. I mean, obviously, the more you simplify it, the more deviation you have, but you still want to keep the key facts straight, and you don't want to overpromise. You want to be realistic, and so expectation management, but then just take time and repeat it.
How does that all translate, though, into the model of, you see, longer meetings and pitches? But in today's, and I don't mean this negatively, but in today's meme culture and bite size and social media, how do you bring down concepts as complicated as this into that realm that if you want to be able to scale the types of things that we're talking about here, you have to be able to communicate in that language?
It makes it hard. It makes it hard. And one of the things I keep saying, hardware, we're building hardware, and that is hard. It's not an app, and you got to manage expectations. Building a machine like this is not as fast and as cheap as writing a new app. It is just not. And if that's what you're after, then that won't work, right? So it's also picking the right audience, right? Because on the other hand, I very strongly resonate with what Will said. We want to get the things done that really help us and really make life better. We got to do the hard stuff. The easy stuff, well, everybody does that anyway.
What's that saying? I think it's attributed to Feynman, that if you cannot explain or describe something simply, you don't understand it. So, and I think that is the hardest thing. And so that's the first thing I would share is, if you truly understand it, you will be able to describe it without loss of fidelity, too much loss of fidelity. The second is, I think, in the end, I think you said it earlier, it doesn't matter how you solve a problem. Actually, you said it earlier. It doesn't matter how you solve a problem, as long as you solve it and you solve somebody's problem. to the customer or to the investor or to a partner, it's a black box. So I think that is a really important point, because instead of being driven by technology, be driven by the problem you're solving and really get that clear up front. Which brings to my third point. The majority of startups fail not because they can solve an interesting problem. It's because they're solving 50 interesting problems. They're boiling the ocean. And because you have very little oxygen that you need to run on, so you need to pick one thing. And that selection process is very important. I remember, Jeff Bezos, one of the only things he talks about startups is focus. And the act of finding that focus is the hardest thing, because you have to let go of a lot of possibilities. And when you're talking to a customer, the first thing the customer is really looking for is, do you know what you're talking about? Have you picked one thing that you're going to be excellent in? Hopefully 10 times better than anybody else or any other smart people. And second, have you solved this problem for me or not? So I think getting those three things together has been very effective.
Well, so quantum's an interesting point. Was we talk, building off what you said, 10 times better, right? Because sometimes being 1.5 times, 2 times, maybe 10 times better is not even good enough to take out an incumbent, right? You got to be 100 times better. And quantum's been an interesting realm here about, is it coming? Is it here? Where are we at? So my question actually is we're thinking about the innovation and where we're going. Are we moving? Is it an incremental approach? Is it step functions? Is it something we're waiting for a single innovation to happen and then we're off to the races? What's going on?
Let me take a gander at that first, and I'll, give it to my smarter, co-panelists here. At least one of my views is, when you look at innovation, it's always incremental. We think about, when the airplane was invented, short flight, the actual architecture of the airplane is not what is the modern architecture. But they demonstrated proof of principle. And then there's all these decades during which various other companies came in, or endeavors came in, and they actually formulated what the airplane fuselage looks like, what the shapes look like, how do you control it, and so on and so forth. And now we have the airplane. But when we look backwards at it, it seems as if it came as a step function, which is not the case. So I think a very powerful way of innovation is engaging a specific problem with a specific customer who really has that problem, and working with them to solve it purely, totally, and completely, much better than anybody else. And that iterative cycle is innovation. It is I don't believe it's a step function. So what we are seeing here in quantum is that series of iterations happening. You're seeing that S-curve, go from one level to the other level. And we are seeing different snapshots of that, in this panel over here.
So I think scientists see that, and I think quantum native people see that, and I think they see that because they're looking on a molecular level. If you back out even a couple of nanometers, let alone if you say that's somewhere down on the stage, it's arguable that the innovation has stopped. I just gave a presentation at Quantum World Congress. Since the year before, when I talked there were 89 world's first announcements, world's greatest, world's most. There were 59 groundbreaking physics discovery, and there was over 200 gonna change the world in a year. If any of that were true, there would be a market. She wouldn't be having trouble raising money. I wouldn't be having that trouble. Nobody up here would be doing that. It would be flowing, okay? If you go to 2014, you look at the cover of February's Time magazine, it says, quantum computing is coming, cancer will be cured in 2 years, everything's great. If you look at 2023's February cover Time magazine, it has IBM's quantum computer on it. The only difference is the graphics, and the story says the same thing, okay? That's because the progress and the innovation that they're seeing, like at Pasqal and at other companies, doesn't matter to us. It's phenomenal. It's huge. It's definitely, you can say, demonstrably, measurably, this industry is moving forward. But this industry doesn't move forward until there's more collaboration, a lot more transparency on some of the science. It can't just be like magic black box science, right? As a CIO, I'm not going to buy that. for any amount of money, right? And there's got to be, more importantly, time to value, right? All the things enterprises buy. So has there been progress? Yes. Does that progress matter in the market? Not at all. It's indistinguishable. I mean, as a CIO, I can't look at any of those announcements and go, this is the one, or this is the thing I should have my team dig on. And that's partially our fault in the community, because people are trying to share these amazing discoveries they've made, but that's not what the market is looking for. You know, I see all these standpoints, the market's worth $100 trillion and $5 billion, and maybe it's 2 or it could be 27. And the reason nobody knows is because right now you could very easily argue on the computing side, not your side. You have an actual real world, very demonstrable problem.
You
We're
know
kind
all
of a
those TAMs are made up.
We're kind of a technology. Yeah, I mean, I saw a quantum company with a $50 trillion TAM last month. I saw their presentation. That's insane, okay? Apple doesn't have a $50 trillion TAM. But to give it over to you, you know, I just want to say, like, there is progress. You have to understand what lens you're looking through it. If I'm looking through the lens of a quantum scientist, of somebody really, wow, there's amazing stuff happening, without a doubt. If I'm looking through the lens of, I want to put a quantum computer in my Fortune 500 company, it just sounds like a bunch of bullshit. Right? Hundreds of advancements. Why am I not using it already? Why is it not more? So it's really important to understand the context and the lens you're looking at it through, because all too often, people on the business side are too critical of the science side and don't give them enough credit, and vice versa, right? So it's really important that we have a lot more education, a lot more collaboration on, you know, I agree with what you said. Our entire business model, everybody laughed. Oh, you only have 2 customers? Oh, you only have 5 customers, right? We're 7 years old. Now we have a couple dozen. But we did exactly what you suggested. We found the right customers in the right industries, and we focused on their problem and only solving their problem. I didn't care about 1,000 customers in pharma. I cared about J&J. They're my customer, massive problems. Let's solve that. And we did. And they came back and they bought more, and they bought more, and they bought more, just like you're saying. I think that has absolutely nailed that approach.
One question, yeah.
I don't know. I may not, sir. Wait. I haven't decided if I'm allowing the question. Hang on. No, just kidding.
In VC, there's always this tension between like idealism and then like the little monster as to how things play out. So like, you know, the early PCs, they were supposed to be a bicycle for the mind, but actually video games is what sold them.
Yep. Exactly. Nailed it. Nailed it. We don't know. We don't know, and we're still on the advanced research side, right? And we haven't converted. We haven't converted to applied research, right? I don't look at it by the verticals or that. I look at it by how many qubits do what math, right? So like right now, if you want to do combinatorial optimization, there's a ton of stuff you can do, and there's a ton of stuff. We're helping, you know, a large company redo their entire rail system supplies. We're helping energy companies with unit commitment problems. There's tons of stuff you can do on those machines today. You go into linear algebra, you want to go into differential equations, you want to go into factorization. Each of those are a few years out, right, behind each other. How many? I don't know. We could be one discovery from a quantum advance that really, you know, advances stuff. But like, you have to look at it by, look, it's like AI. AI is not magic, it's math, okay? It's not really, it's an awesome parlor trick, but it's still a parlor trick. So if you break these things down to first principles and you look at it, you say, quantum computers and quantum-inspired computers, where programs where you're taking a quantum-inspired algorithm and running it on a GPU or whatever, those are useful today in combinatorial optimization. Outside of that, probably not a lot. But that's okay, because you know what the TI-99-4A I learned how to program on was useful for? Jack shit, okay? But that's the thing, is from Jack Kilby inventing the integrated circuit to where we are now with the iPhone, right? That's all going to happen with these new sets of technologies, and not just quantum, but a heterogeneous platform around quantum and DNA and everything in a fraction of the time. Like there's a watershed moment coming, like literally in the next year or two. And I've been holding off. I mean, we knew we were too early. We have a 25-year plan. What did I tell my investors? There'll be no revenues. They said, for how long? I don't know, 5 years, 10 years? I don't know, somewhere in there. And by the way, not every investor is comfortable with that. I don't care, right? Because the thing that I want to make sure everybody is doing in quantum is being very transparent and very realistic and very open about where things are at. When you do that, you can build the relationships, right? You can get the CIO that goes, all right, I get it. Let me put a little bit of budget. But I interview 100 CIOs every year on quantum. That's my gig. I can tell you top 3 pharmaceutical budgets for quantum this year: 400K, 150K, 50K. All right. I can tell you we have
real money right there.
We have several. I'm rich. You know, we have several military companies. Contract. I can go through all of them. I can tell you, there's not $20 million amongst 100 companies. So we don't have an industry yet. That's real. We are on the verge of one of the greatest industries in the history of our species. That's also true. The timing thing is where people are going to get caught up. And I think most of the companies that started 5-7 years ago, they're out of business. I think 2025 sees a lot of quantum companies go away because a lot of people were entrepreneurs and they weren't quantum physicists. And, you know, I met Will, one of the first people I met in quantum, and he was like, whoa, slow down there. And I was like, all right, I'm going to listen to these guys and Christoph and everybody. And you go, okay, it's important to know where it is and what you can actually do with it. A lot of people read that Time magazine article, went out, talked to a VC, got funding. It's like all of those companies are gone. They're going to be dead, right? Because they built something based on bad data. They were like, oh, I assume it's here or it's in a year or two. I can make it a year or two. It might be 5 years. It might be 7.
Manuel, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, let me come at this from a little different angle maybe, because there were interesting examples you pointed out there, right? Like, okay, the computers and video games and internet and so on, but of course it's true, but they are very specific lens, and it's a lens, and this is also something that we have to deal with in the VC community. They're a lens. This is all things that are addressed to an end customer. You're selling a widget. Which is not what everybody does, right? It's not what we do. It's there's a company out there called ASML. Nobody knew about that company until Chip Wars came out, basically. ASML has a market cap of 350 billion euros. And they have a monopoly. And they sell a machine that is $500 million per machine. And it takes 8 747s to transport. Are you ever going to buy a machine like that? No. Do they run ads, really? No. That's not how their whole business model works, right? There is a whole, and the same could be said for many other large industrial type things, right? Are you gonna buy an oven to smelt steel? No, right? Still, there's companies out there that make this, and they have customers. So there's but of course we focus on the things we tend to know from our private experience, and this is iPhones, and this is things we buy, right? But there's a very different side out there. And arguably that is what gives us the big structural improvements to society, to quality of life, and all that, right? I mean, yeah, sure, video games are fun, but did they contribute to our risen life expectancy? Could probably argue the opposite, but won't.
But I think you're hitting on a great point right now, though, is the horizontal technology and the infrastructure stack is what's changing. And I think post-COVID, that there's almost been a vibe shift towards that. Now, some of it we've seen from technology perspective. I mean, there's a reason NVIDIA is driving the market caps it's driving because it is the infrastructure layer of AI right now, right? As you said, ASML, I had never heard of it 5 years ago. And of course, as you were presenting, I leaned over to Worley and said, I'm like, is he taking on ASML? Like, was the first thing I said. So I think that is. So have you all felt this vibe shift recently in that the horizontal technologies are becoming that whether it's a mental shift, whether it's just the technology stack is suddenly open now because of these inventions that have occurred right now?
So one thing that I wanted to add to the conversation we're just having and flows over into this one is this idea of what is the pace of innovation. And I think that what we've seen because of the proliferation of VC and deep tech space, right? It's obviously all over biotech as well, right? Is that there are formulas for winning and there are expectations of LPs. I mean, this is a business after all, right? But it also ended up transforming our expectation of the innovation cycle. And I think that it's when we went out and first started pitching, we had to look for funds that were patient, right? This is the famous words, right? Very often they'll call them sort of long horizon funds or frontier funds or hard tech funds. I mean, they all have, again, are pioneer tech funds. But the idea would be that they were patient enough for the cycle of innovation to happen rather than what has become a custom, right, in the situation. But what technology evolution has taught us over and over and over again is that very often things are not, I mean, as you're talking about the stack, right, invented in isolation, and then the single company does everything around it. When we first started pitching, trying to build an entire hardware suite, we took our risk profile to a VC from like something that was somewhat manageable with a single instrument that was hard to unimaginable with 6 instruments that you needed to do, and you have to wait for them to all come to fruition, and you have to wire them together, and they have to work, that you're going to build a stack. And that was a very hard vision for a lot of people to stomach. So what did we do? We went back to the grant world and found, you know, grants allow you to have the risk profile that investors can't take on, and they have to be patient, right? I mean, this idea of you have to be patient for innovation to actually be realized. If you want it to be realized where it's actually high quality technology that actually can serve use cases, you have to not get lost in the hype. And what unfortunately has happened is that people wanting to meet the expectation of investors have gone into this hype extreme, and quantum is well into that problem, right? I think you'll get that from all of us here, right? I mean, but it's wildly frustrating because then it ends up having the backlash of correction and skepticism. But I think that, you know, people who are really committed to trying to build the stack for real and actually solve the problems by creating technology which can be tested and can actually be used by others in the community for real feedback, it's like every other technology innovation. It's important, and it will actually be the foundation for the revolution.
You're looking at everybody that would have been in the homebrew compute club back in the day, and that's about where we're at. I think that's fair.
I mean, one way I can answer your question, and maybe tie back to your question earlier, is so our revenue numbers, without giving any details, are in 8 figures. Our revenue numbers are in 8 figures. Our bookings are obviously higher than that. This is a very tangible, quantitative way of measuring the vibe. And if you just look at the actual hardware sales that are happening around quantum hardware, those numbers are very large. Now, why are these companies, the end customers, investing in that? Right? They clearly understand that regardless of where it stands right now, it is something that is worth investing in because they don't want to be left behind. And what is it that they're afraid of not being left behind about? Because people understand that there are very important class of problems that we can solve even today that are not solvable otherwise, number one. And number two, if this platform becomes ubiquitous, then they don't want to be on the back foot. And they don't want to be there. So I think it is, maybe we should not think from a scarcity point of view. Because an analogy here would be that when compute started, decades and decades ago, the numbers were small and there were specialized applications. But people invested, and that investment made the industry, defined the problems that made the industry. That's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. And the homebrew club, I think, is a very good analogy to it because it depends on how big is this homebrew. I mean, homebrew means it could still be tens of billions of dollars or billions of dollars, right? Because the world economy is much larger now. NVIDIA is 20 years old. To your earlier question, what is the killer app? They were doing gaming, and before that, NVIDIA almost died multiple times, right? And it's only when other innovation came together that you found that what they solved in another way could really solve the transformer and, you know, doing the LLMs really, really well. And now that opens an entirely new field for them. And they're thinking about the 3-computer problem and so on and so forth. It's a really interesting way that the world is developing. And I think that's the way we should think about quantum computing as well. So the initial applications are going to be limited by our imaginations. As people interact with them, they will discover new areas, and smarter, better ideas will come out of that. And that is the flywheel that we will build. And that's our job, to get the ball rolling.
All right. So everyone's going to have a chance to attack all the panelists and ask them plenty of questions. So for the final question, and I'm going to limit you all to like 1 sentence because I know you can give entire dissertations on this question, but what's next for quantum and physics tech? Or we'll get silence. Hey.
What happens to all tech, right? everybody keeps referring to the iPhone. None of you give a shit about the fact that when I say, hey Siri, my voice is converted to a digital signal that is then turned into electrons and sent down to the bottom of the chip. You care that you can say, send my wife a text, I'm late, right? So what has to happen for quantum to take off as an industry, and there's just no doubt, because there's not enough of a market to sell if you're just selling to something that's science dependent, right? Is it has to become something that is consumable, and that's what happens.
Quantum becomes consumable. I hope so, right? I mean, in a lot of these fields, you're also seeing that quantum needs to be miniaturized in order to get the cost down for manufacturing. So one of the things which I think has been true across our industry is there's not been enough focus, and there was a slide today, right, on the fact that to actually make this into a business, you have to care about the manufacturing piece. So I'm hoping in the next 5 years, right, this changes and that the cost of quantum comes down so you can have those consumables.
Energy. Right now, there was just a few days ago, there was a big splash, even in the New York Times, that they are basically ramping up 3 Mile Island again just to run an AI computer.
Nice.
Right? All right. Is that a good idea? I don't know, but it's
Yes.
certainly something. Energy is the big thing. None of these AI things, none of these things will really do if we don't figure that out somehow. And there is not one magic bullet to do that. There is many things. This is better solar cells, better batteries, energy storage is going to be huge, energy grid distribution. If somebody can figure out room temperature, ambient pressure superconductors, that would be a bigger impact than anything else we could even talk about. Unfortunately, I don't quite know how to do that yet, right? But it goes back to efficiency.
Well, then what have you
it
been
goes back
doing
to
this
energy.
whole time?
Yeah, I'm just playing. I'm just wasting my life. I know. No, but I mean, but you see this. You had the phone there, right? Computers went from building size to on your desk to in your hand. I was for not so happy reasons, but I was in the hospital the other day, and usually they used to take you to the room where the X-ray machine is. That other weekend, they actually now rolled the X-ray machine into the room where you were sitting. That's progress. And I talked about a big X-ray machine. We have other means of making images. At some point, we have a tricorder. At some point, I'm not sure if I'm going to see it, but we are pushing towards this. So there's so many things in physics tech to push. Got colleagues here from UT that do amazing things, and it's all these different areas that right now are fundamental research coming together, and we can't predict how they will come together. There's like 4 or 5 that will combine to make something new and spectacular, but you don't know today which 4 or 5. But you have to keep doing it to find out, basically.
You know, I'll just, when you asked the question, I was just thinking about, let me say something slightly provocative. The world that we live in today, it is primarily built on the scale-up of science that we did in 19th century or early part of 20th century. That's the world we live in today. Think about it. The internet is electromagnetism. There's a lot that we utilize is that. But there's something very interesting that happened in 20th century. We discovered the quantum nature of reality, but then in latter part of 20th century, we discovered how to control it and to make synthetic systems out of that. That's huge. That is the future. It's like unlocking the next level of control in the universe. And one way to think about that is nature itself is a quantum computer. Every process that happens is a quantum computation. And all of a sudden we have these keys on how nature computes itself. How will that change the world? It's immense. We are just beginning to discover it. But once we imagine that and we apply that to the future that will exist, we can see how big that transformation will be. So I think that's one provocative thought we should take away. But when that happens, to your point, technology disappears because I don't care how it happens. Just like I don't care why the chair stays on the floor, right? It just stays. It will become seamless and intuitive. The divide between us as humans and the technology that serves us should disappear. And that's the second big thing that happens when we mature. And that's what we are hoping to build.
Thank you all very much. So what's next, Austin? We're glad you've joined us on this journey. Please subscribe at your favorite podcast catcher, leave us a review, and let your colleagues know about us. This will help us grow the podcast and continue bringing you unique interviews and insights. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.